The lonely victims. The soft, amber glow of the lounge lights did little to dispel the quiet melancholy that often hung over the corner booths of the city. It was a place where lonely souls converged, each looking for a brief escape, a friendly conversation, or perhaps something more permanent. In the background, a gentle melody played from the jukebox, weaving through the low murmur of chatter and the clinking of glasses. Behind the bar stood Alf, a bartender whose sharp eyes saw everything and whose memory held more secrets than the city archives. Beside him stood a man observing the room with practiced ease, trying to gauge the crowd. The man leaned in closer to Alf, nodding slightly toward a young woman sitting by herself. He asked about the girl in the corner booth. Alf, wiping down a glass with a clean towel, replied that her name was Luella and she came in quite a lot, working in one of the mail rooms upstairs. The man listened but chose to pass on that lead, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on another target. He asked about another woman nearby. Alf explained that she modeled swimsuits or lingerie, dropping by mostly on Fridays, and worked with a large pharmaceutical house. Alf joked that he was a veritable fountain of information, to which the man offered his sincere thanks, praising the bartender for his clever hands and sharp mind. The man, who introduced himself simply as Jack, then turned his attention to a woman sitting nearby. He asked the bartender for a refill of scotch and water, making it a matching set for both of them. The woman, caught off guard, mentioned that she was just about to leave. Jack smiled warmly, telling her that she could not possibly leave yet because she had not even finished her drink. He introduced himself formally as Jack and asked for her name. He offered her a cigarette, which she politely declined, admitting that she did not usually come to this place often. Jack claimed he almost never came either. Leaving his check on the counter with a generous tip, Jack suddenly remembered an important business phone call he needed to make. He assured her it would only take a few minutes, asking her to wait so no one would take his drink. She promised to guard it bravely as he stepped away. As Jack walked down the dimly lit hallway toward the public phones, a voice startled him. A woman named Laura appeared from the shadows, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and deep hurt. She asked what he was doing there, explaining that she had waited for him to come back to San Diego for 6 weeks. Jack, whose real name in this shadow world was Frank, warned her that it was dangerous for him up here and that he had told her to stay put. Laura cried out that she was going crazy with worry and that he could have at least called her once in all that time. Suddenly, Frank noticed a man with a cigar watching them from the other side of the hallway. He told Laura to act as if she did not know him, claiming they were being watched by dangerous people who would have all the exits covered. Laura looked at him, her heart breaking as she realized the depth of the deception. She begged him for no more lies. She reminded him that she had helped him rob her own company because he had claimed gamblers would kill him over a $50,000 debt. Frank insisted he still owed the money and that the stolen diamonds were necessary, but Laura cut him off. She realized there were no gambling debts. He and his friends had pulled the robbery entirely for themselves. Frank tried to defend himself, saying he only wanted to protect her from getting mixed up in the danger. He proposed a plan to go out first to lead the watchers away, asking her to wait 10 minutes and meet him later at her place. Laura refused to be left behind again, threatening to call the police if he did not let her come along. Frank looked at her with a heavy sigh, telling her she should have stayed in San Diego before slipping away into the night. A quest for the truth. A few days later, in a quiet, neatly kept living room, a distinguished private investigator named Barnaby Jones sat across from a woman named Miss Andrews. Barnaby spoke gently, noting that her sister, Laura, had been a very handsome woman. Miss Andrews agreed, adding that Laura was also a very strong woman. She invited Barnaby to sit down, expressing her deep grief. Barnaby observed that sometimes people have difficulty accepting tragic events from those they love. Miss Andrews firmly stated that she would never accept that Laura committed suicide. If she did, she would have to accept the blame for driving Laura to such desperation. Barnaby asked if the sisters had experienced conflict. Miss Andrews explained that they had always gotten along perfectly until Laura suddenly quit her job and ran off to San Diego to marry a man named Frank whom she had met in a bar. Miss Andrews had not approved of such a sudden romance with a perfect stranger, and though the newspapers never mentioned a husband because they were never married, Laura had returned home broken-hearted and silent for 2 days before her life ended. Miss Andrews wished to find Frank to understand Laura's state of mind, but she had no last name and only a postcard from San Diego with the motel's name purposely cut off. Barnaby comforted her, noting that the pressure of losing a loved one and facing judgment at home could overwhelm anyone. Miss Andrews wept, remembering how harsh she had been to Laura upon her return, calling her a fool. Barnaby promised Miss Andrews that he would look into the matter thoroughly, offering her the one thing he could guarantee: the absolute truth. Barnaby began his investigation at Laura's former workplace, speaking with the manager, Mr. Inbull. The office was still in disarray following a major robbery that occurred 6 weeks prior, right around the time Laura had left for San Diego. Mr. Inbull fiercely defended Laura's integrity, stating she was completely trustworthy and like his right hand. When Barnaby inquired about the man she was supposed to marry, Mr. Inbull recalled seeing him a few times. The man called himself Frank Miller, a business equipment salesman around 35 years old, handsome, with light hair and a small scar on his chin. Mr. Inbull mentioned they had met in a local singles bar in the neighborhood. Hidden motives and dangerous games. Meanwhile, Jack Arno, formerly known as Frank, was continuing his charm offensive with another unsuspecting woman named Ann Hobson, an administrative assistant at Norlam Pharmaceuticals. They were dining together, and Ann remarked how amazing it was that almost strangers could share so much about themselves. Jack smiled, stating that it was the only way he could truly get to know her, and questioned why he was so intensely curious about the inner workings and security of the pharmaceutical company she worked for. Jack playfully deflected her suspicions, claiming he was simply looking for a new job to be closer to her. Their conversation was interrupted when they took a walk down by the marina. Jack stepped away for a moment to retrieve a sweater left on a boat, only to be confronted by an old acquaintance named Sheila Wiles. Sheila recognized him immediately as Frank, expressing surprise at seeing him up here. When Ann walked up, Jack quickly covered his tracks by introducing Ann as his wife. Sheila was stunned but played along, wishing them well before walking away with her friend Connie. Connie expressed her disbelief, noting that when Jack had been romancing Sheila, he had claimed his wife was confined to a wheelchair for life. Looking at the directory of the Marina Cordoba apartments, they discovered he was now living under the name Jack Arno. Barnaby Jones, tracking the descriptions of Frank Miller, began visiting the local singles bars. He spoke with a bartender who remembered Laura, describing her as a nice girl with her whole life ahead of her. The bartender confirmed that Frank Miller was a frequent patron who specifically targeted intelligent women with good, substantial jobs at prominent companies. The bartender noted that Frank was a different breed, using his charm to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. A woman named Sheila Wiles, overhearing the conversation, approached Barnaby, playfully calling him the Silver Fox. When Barnaby revealed he was a private detective looking for Frank to help with a case, Sheila became intrigued. Barnaby left his card, asking her to have Frank call him if she ran into him. It was not long before Sheila confronted Frank at his apartment, discovering his floor plans of various companies, including the one where she used to work that had suffered a massive robbery. She realized Frank was a criminal mastermind who used women to gain inside information about security systems. Instead of going to the police, Sheila attempted to leverage this information, demanding that they become partners in life and wealth, suggesting a trip to Acapulco once his next big job was finished. Frank smiled and agreed, but a dark calculation formed in his mind. The final pieces fall into place. The next morning, the police discovered a tragic scene at the docks. A woman's purse containing Barnaby Jones's business card was found near the water. Barnaby arrived at the scene to make a positive identification of Sheila Wiles. The authorities believed it to be an accidental drowning, suggesting she might have tripped in the dark and hit her head before falling into the water. However, Barnaby noticed a strange fiber on her dress and took a sample, sensing a much deeper and more sinister pattern connecting Laura and Sheila. Barnaby visited Sheila's roommate, Connie Maxwell, who confirmed that Sheila had recently confronted Frank under his new alias, Jack Arno, at the Marina Cordoba apartments. Equipped with this vital information, Barnaby went directly to Jack's apartment. When confronted, Jack tried to laugh it off, claiming he changed his name because of gambling debts and that Laura's tragic end was simply due to her overreacting to a very minor romance. He denied seeing Sheila recently, but Barnaby remained deeply skeptical, noting that bumping into Jack seemed to be incredibly hazardous to the health of his former companions. The climax unfolded late at night at Norlam Pharmaceuticals. Jack had managed to convince Ann Hobson that he was actually an undercover narcotics officer working to stop an inside robbery, using this elaborate lie to gain access to the building's main security vault and ultrasensor keys. Just as Jack and his accomplice were about to disable the alarms and execute the theft, Barnaby Jones entered the dark offices. Barnaby confronted and, quickly explaining the truth about Jack Arno and his real identity as Frank Miller, the man responsible for the ruin of multiple innocent women. Before and could fully process the shock, Jack and his accomplice emerged from the shadows with weapons drawn, threatening them. A tense standoff ensued, but the swift arrival of the facility's security guards and the police, alerted by the anomalous camera disruptions, completely turned the tables. The criminals were quickly disarmed and taken into custody without further incident. In the quiet aftermath of the investigation, Ann Hobson sat with Barnaby Jones, expressing her profound gratitude mixed with the embarrassment of being so foolishly deceived. Barnaby comforted her with a gentle, trademark smile, reminding her that human nature is fragile and that even the wisest individuals can be misled by a sophisticated deceiver. He shared a light-hearted joke about history to ease her burden, assuring her that justice had been served. Most importantly, Laura's sister could finally find true peace of mind and emotional healing, knowing with absolute certainty that she was not responsible for her sister's fate and that the light of truth had finally dispelled the shadows of deception.